Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell. Joining me, I guess maybe not fresh off, but on his way out, sort of training camp, is intrepid training camp notes writer and reporter, Vikings blogger extraordinaire, and generally useful human, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
I'm great, man. How are you?
You know, I'm doing pretty well. I successfully went to and returned from New York City, the City of Lights.
New York City?
New York City. No salsa of any particular repute was to be had. I can tell you, it may deserve the reputation greatest city in the world. Phenomenal place.
But you can't like tell them that.
Well, no, but one of the great things about New York is that you frequently can't tell the people you're around anything because they don't really speak English. And I think that cements New York's place as like a city of the world and not just like another American city.
That's a pretty good point.
It's an asset, not a detriment. Chinatown has a number of non-native English speakers or non-English speakers, and also some of the cheapest, most amazing food I've ever had in my entire life. And I eat a lot.
Oh, wow. It's almost as if that's an interest of yours.
I know, right? Weird how that works.
We should talk about that in the podcast at some point. in the future, obviously.
Yeah, I know we have never before delved into that, but it might be something to consider in a future episode. At any rate, I survived the horror of Frontier Airlines' quote-unquote pre-reclined seats, which is...
Oh, wait, no, tell me about that, because I think I saw someone else post about that.
It was probably me, but...
No, because I saw you post about it, too, and I saw that someone else had, so...
Oh, yeah, no, it's a new thing. So in the probably 3 or 4 months since I've flown on Frontier, they've replaced the seats in their airplanes with even less comfortable ones. They're borderline like plastic subway seats, and I wish they would just get it over with and like put us all in those.
Just put in plastic subway seats?
Exactly, in 4 rows facing each other. Just cram us in like the cattle we are. Stop pretending that we're your valued guests. Like, come on. Like
Have you seen the hexagonal seat designs that someone has proposed?
Yes, and I guess I support that. Like, Frontier has already started doing one thing that I think airlines should have been doing for a long time, and that's charging more for a carry-on than for a checked bag. Because checked bags do not delay the boarding and deboarding process as badly as people with carry-ons do. But aside from that, when you sit down in these newly uncomfortable seats, and then as they're doing the like pre-flight check and showing you how the seatbelts work and the oxygen mask thing, pop quiz: how many oxygen masks are there above a row of 3 seats?
I was gonna guess 3, but now that you've asked,
you would be wrong. There are 4.
4? Okay. Oh, like babies?
Yes, 3 for like passengers, 1 for a baby.
Oh. Well, so long as like the ratio of each individual set of 3 seats is 1 to 3.
Well, yeah,
sounds like it would work out.
It mostly works out. But as they're explaining all this to you, they also invite you to enjoy their pre-reclined seats. I believe the sentence he used was
that sounds extraordinarily similar to bullshit.
You will note that your seats are pre-reclined, which I had not noted because the seats did not seem to be reclined at all. God. And I immediately...
What if you don't like reclined seats? Because there are people who don't like reclined seats.
Well, then you're in luck. Because Frontier's pre-reclined seats are not actually reclined. But I immediately felt deeply insulted. Just like that trick might work on someone who had literally never been on an airplane before. But bullshit meter may have been damaged in that moment. So
PolitiFact has judged your claim and determined that it was pants on fire.
Pants aflame. But for your safety, fire extinguishers are located in the exit rows and also near the lavatories. We would like to take this moment to thank everyone who listens to Norse Code as we ramp up into next season. And also thank you to everyone who purchased Arif's training camp guide. There were many of you, and we are grateful, especially Arif is grateful for each and every one of those purchases as they were able to mostly successfully
Significantly
fund.
grateful. I really appreciate it. And if it were not for that, don't think I would have been able to make it to training camp. So, in fact, I'm confident I wouldn't have been able to make it to training camp. So I really appreciate it, especially the surprise mid-training camp purchases, which I did not expect and were greatly also welcomed.
Well, then we're recording this episode on August 9th, and we've had one purchase of the training camp guide in the last 24 hours, which...
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that goes to show that the training camp guide, while a useful preview to what's going to happen in training camp, has value beyond training camp, just as a primer for the players who will potentially be on the 53-man roster this season, which we will talk about later, and also the value of just everything else in the guide that goes beyond training camp. So it's still available for purchase at NorseCodePodcast.com if you should decide that you would like a comprehensive guide to all things Vikings going into the 2016 season. And you can purchase that guide at NorseCodePodcast.com. You can also go there to make a contribution to the show directly, either via PayPal if you want to make a one-time contribution in any amount, or via Patreon, our much preferred method, which would allow you to subscribe to a once per month donation of any amount you choose. We suggest about Tree Fitty. Keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay for yet another season. And that'll get you things like the internet box that Arif took to training camp, and fun upgrades to the Norse Code episode processing process.
Also super useful, by the way.
Oh yeah, I'm glad that worked out for you. That it especially after last season, like the first couple of years when you went to training camp and we tried to do the show, it was a nightmare, and there were even a couple of episodes where we were both in hotels, and that was a real struggle to get any kind of sound quality that we could use. But luckily, the listeners of Norse Code were able to provide us with a solution that probably made the rest of your internet life easier as well.
No, for sure. I was able to use it at some pretty surprising times, actually. Like when I thought I would get really solid internet, or when I thought I had an Ethernet cable connect to even outside of the hotel. Switching between 3 hotels, which is something I had to do this year, which I haven't had to do in the previous 3 years because of Ribfest of all things. Often made it so that I didn't have a hotel from which I could write from. So the MiFi became super useful. We exhausted nearly all of the data that was on it, which is kind of cool. It's kind of like when if you're in charge of a budget that's set by a committee and you use everything but the last $10 so you can justify asking for a bigger budget. It's exactly like that. It was perfect.
Fantastic. Would you say that you were the envy of everyone else in the media room?
Probably no for a lot of reasons, but I'm sure that they didn't mind if they were in a similar situation. I'll say that.
Not quite the endorsement I was looking for, but I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, envy, I think, is sort of all-encompassing, and, journalists tend not to envy bloggers.
And you can find, if you don't care to go to NorseCodePodcast.com, which you should, we've got a brand new site for this season, also purchased in part by our listeners, that is designed for use with your mobile device. All the episodes line up very conveniently with episode notes, fully annotated. You can also contribute to the show by going to either paypal.me/NorseCode or patreon.com/NorseCode. And I guess second to lastly, Norse Code is now on YouTube. So if you search Norse Code Minnesota Vikings, then you can find a near complete archive of episodes. Everything that was not hosted on Blog Talk Radio or SoundCloud. So basically everything from seasons like, 2.5 through now?
Yeah. Sounds about right.
Is available for listening on YouTube. If for whatever reason your podcast aggregator is like mine and just decides to be a piece of crap every now and then, and you can't live without your Norse code fix. And all that stuff drops at the same time because thanks to the system we have built, in conjunction with our listeners, we are robust and sturdy. Like a Norseman.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Smelling what I'm stepping in? Stepping in what I'm smelling? I always forget how that one goes.
Is that what? I'm smelling what you're cooking?
Oh, that one's much better, actually. Let's go with that. Last note before we get into the football portion of the podcast at approximately minute 11. Fantasy football sign up is still available in the sense that you can join the lottery to be a part of the Norse Code Fantasy Football League, which will hopefully not have anyone auto drafting this year. And you can do that.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah. But hey, it's one of the vagaries of fantasy. And frankly, like Kyle was able to put the waiver wire to work, sort of. And I shouldn't make fun because I still finished below him in the standings. So, although
a lot of people, he did surprisingly well, if I remember.
Well, I think that given that everyone was expecting him to lose outright, yes, that is correct. But you can email us at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com or shoot us a tweet at norsecodedn. James is still accepting email addresses and names to be added to the lottery, from which we will draw a series of unfortunate names who will join us in the relentless death march toward the ends of a season in a fantasy football league. I think I sold that pretty well, wouldn't you say?
No, I think you did. Yeah.
It's pretty compelling.
Go Team Us.
Compelling radio happening tonight. So you have been writing a series of training camp notebooks for Cold Omaha, and fielding a lot of questions about the same couple of topics. I can promise you that you will be fielding a couple more in the mailbag. And cool. I wanted to there's 2 more practices, right?
Yeah, they'll be in Cincinnati. I won't be, so
you're functionally done with training camp, even though the training camp experience for the Vikings is not over.
Correct.
All right. Well, then, by way of recap, I would like to play a game with you that I call In Exactly 7 Words.
So this is not 7 words or fewer. It's exactly 7 words.
It has to be exactly 7 words. And
okay.
There are 7 categories to this game that I think will give us a pretty comprehensive sense of Vikings training camp. And then we'll break down further into kind of your thoughts that have not already been written about some of the highlights and lowlights and stuff about training camp. So here we go. In exactly 7 words, Teddy Bridgewater. And it's okay to count on your fingers because no one can see you.
Even better now with deep ball.
All right. In exactly 7 words, the offensive line.
Oh, this one's easy. Getting closer to average, still pretty bad.
Oh, it's not those last 3 words were not the ones I wanted you to say. In exactly 7 words, the wide receiving core.
We have Antonio Brown and some guys.
In exactly 7 words, Adrian Peterson.
Okay, that's 8. Oh. Backs are hard to evaluate in camp.
Wow. That is an expert hedge, the most lukewarm take on Adrian Peterson in months.
but like I say this every year in training camp. It's not like a new one. I sometimes note when running backs look shifty or explosive, and in fairness, Adrian Peterson has looked shifty and explosive, but like most backs do. And like Matt Asiata looks fluid, and smooth, which is what I was trying to say.
Fluid, I like that.
Fluid and smooth. But like no one would believe that anyway, and it might not amount to much. So, like I just kind of keep my hands off of evaluating running backs in camp.
Well, and we have a mailbag question that will force you to address that issue in slightly more depth later.
I mean, you say it'll force me. I say I'll answer however I want.
Arif Hassan does what he wants. In exactly 7 words, the defensive line.
Okay, that's 1 word, so that'll work. They will wreak nightmares upon their opponents.
Wow. All right, then in exactly 7 words, defensive backs.
Defensive backs. I don't know why this is taking me longer.
It's fine. I'm just gonna fill in with some background music, probably "Africa" by Toto. Do 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 do.
Do 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 do. I keep on coming up with 6 words. I can do this. They will seem marginally better this year.
All right. And finally, in exactly 7 words, coaching.
That's so difficult to evaluate in camp, but...
That's 7 words.
What? No, it's not.
That's so difficult to evaluate in camp. Yep, that's 7 words.
Oh, but I just came up with it.
Well, that's okay. You can have a second bite at the apple this time.
I'm kind of upset with myself, but also impressed. No candy asses on the staff this year. Assuming candy asses is 1 word, and I think it is.
Even if it's hyphenated, it still counts as 1.
Fantastic.
I'm impressed that you were able to come up with 1 without even thinking about it. So this has been in exactly 7 words.
Do humans naturally think in 7-word sentences? Is that... I don't know, man.
Well, there is like a natural like human affinity for odd numbers in like the visual arts and stuff.
That's true.
I don't know if it applies to language. I have not read any studies or done any to that point, but I just thought in exactly 7 words seemed like enough words to come up with a cogent sentence, but like not so many that you would have an opportunity to be long-winded. Like you would have to think about each of your answers, which you did, except for the last one.
This is a surprisingly manipulable game, though, because like I can use pronouns to describe to just add words if I need to, and I can cut pronouns if I... So, for example, Teddy Bridgewater, I got rid of all the pronouns, and then I had 7 words. Whereas with the defensive line, I could have gotten rid of 2 words, or whatever, and it still would have been fine. So, this is actually... I like this game.
Well, and there's the opportunity for like filler words and interjections and stuff. If you have a really great like 5-word point to make, but
interjections seem like cheating. Like wow at the end, like okay,
or okay, like yeah, exactly. That it could potentially be cheating. I think you embraced the spirit of the game, and I think it went so well that we may employ this as a tool in the season, preferably on guests.
All right, it's a bit now. We made a bit.
Because we're doing it live. We don't believe in practice. Judd Zolgad's hoodie at JZ Hoodie on Twitter sent us a question. Will Arif and Dusty O'Connell be in pads tonight? And I tweeted back. I was like, well, that implies that we practice. We always show up in full pads for game day.
Talk about practice, not a game.
This is not a game. Football is a game, but talking about it is not. So now that we have covered training camp, like all of its functional areas in exactly 7 words apiece, let's spend some more words
So it's like 49 because it was 7 dimensions of training camp.
Yep, 7 dimensions.
Words, 49 words.
And 49 words of training camp right there. Let's see any podcast you better than that. But I would like to pick your brain a little bit because you did a great job writing your training camp notebooks, and those can all be found at coldomaha.com. But I kind of wanted to get an opinion from you as to what like maybe the most and least impressive kind of players and or squads were at training camp, and then maybe some key takeaways from training camp that you maybe haven't written about yet. Unless I'm, stepping on something you're about to write, in which case, save them and then instead fill that time with,
with
behind
general
the
impressions.
Well, no, with behind the scenes stuff. Maybe some bits from the media room that you found enjoyable, because it seems like it's a pretty close knit group of people, and it seems like a lot of fans go to training camp too. So if there were any maybe slightly off topic things that happened that you think were particularly funny or of note, then please elucidate.
Well, how about this? I'll go over the 7 most impressive, or 7 players who were among the most impressive, because I'm not gonna write down 90 players, then come up with a list and this person's actually 8th, and I meant to put them 8th, but I listed them in 7. So 7 players who are among the most impressive, 7 players among the least impressive, to continue the theme of 7. Because why not make that the theme? And then let's see if we can get some bonus behind the scenes, if I can come up with some behind the scenes stuff by the time we get to that. So, most impressive, Stephon Diggs. I don't think there's that's, by the way, I don't know if you caught that. That's the person I've been referring to as Antonio Brown. Part of the reason I said that is because it annoys Kean Fahey, who was really upset that I compared Stephon Diggs to Antonio Brown in another podcast. But he really has been extremely impressive. He's won something like 80% of the reps that I've taken a look at in one-on-ones. He's looked phenomenal in 11s. He's been double teamed and still found ways to get open and stuff like that.
There's a couple of really impressive GIFs you posted from the last couple of days where he gets double teamed and still comes down with the ball.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. He's winning contested catches a little bit better than he did during the season last year, which, word of warning, Charles Johnson last year also did a decent job. Not a great job, not as good as Stephon, but a decent job winning contested catches in training camp, and then that did not translate to the 2015 season. But I will say he's been winning contested catches more often than he does in the regular season, which is maybe sort of the biggest area of improvement for him. He is winning at all 3 levels of the field. He's caught screen passes, and he's taken them for more than 8 yards. He's caught the ball deep. He's caught the ball intermediate. He's found ways to win inside and outside and stuff like that. He wins from the slot. He's incredible. So he's been phenomenal throughout training camp, and it is really difficult to sort of overstate how well that he's done. After Stephon Diggs, I'd say Alex Boone. That's not a huge surprise to people. They've heard that Boone has been doing well throughout camp, but because it's the offensive line, and the offensive line tends to be characterized more by mistakes they make than successes they create, it's very difficult to isolate how good of a player someone like Alex Boone can be. And I want to say that he might be the only person who did a pretty consistently good job of dealing with Linval Joseph. I don't know how to tell you that Linval Joseph is very good. But the fact that he did some pretty great work against Sullivan and Fusco that the other defensive tackles couldn't, but he couldn't do it against Boone, I think is a pretty good sign. And then also Boone moved pretty well in the running game. He was able to get to the second level pretty well, pancake some people and stuff like that. Along the same vein, I'll add Linval Joseph to the list, who looks even better than he did last year. I remember him in camp last year winning a lot of battles and generally doing pretty well. But, this year he has been monstrous, and which makes sense because I think he's entering his athletic peak as a nose tackle, somewhere like 27, 28. And he's in year 3 of a scheme, which I don't know if 3 is a magic number, but people seem to think that it is. And he looks incredible. I think Mike Zimmer said something along the lines of, he's great in all areas of the game, but if I were to isolate sort of one area that he should get better at or could get better at this year, it'll be, having more of a pass rush, which that would be phenomenal if you could figure out, not just because he was a pretty good pass rusher in New York as a Giant, but the reason he was held back a little bit his first year with the Vikings, besides getting shot, and his second year with the Vikings, which is last year, It's that he needed to stay home because he didn't figure out sort of when he would pass rush, not just how to pass rush. And so knowing when he can freelance and knowing when he has to stay to the scheme is probably going to be pretty important for him. Adding to that, maybe alongside him on the defensive line, Everson Griffin looks even better this year, which I think is saying something because I think Matt Kalil, the person he lined up most often against last year, looked worse last year. I think Matt Kalil looks a little bit better this year, and Everson Griffin looks better as well. And it's very difficult to describe that because they go up against each other. But, he looks quicker off the line. Mike Zimmer also mentioned that he has more moves to his arsenal. I haven't cataloged sort of every move in his repertoire, but I have, taken a look at sort of the variety of moves with which he's willing to attack. Matt Kalil certainly looks like he has that. And some of the moves that I remember seeing him, put on film last year and put on in training camp last year are even more effective this year, including, a stab move, which is just phenomenal. He walked Matt Kalil right into the quarterback. I would add David Morgan to the list. He's somebody that, I don't know, he just wins matchups. He's a better route runner. I mean, I'm basically repeating Mike Zimmer at this point when I say, he's a better route runner than I expected, a better route runner than evidently Zimmer expected. He catches a lot of balls. I mean, I think the only drop was actually today. He went through almost all of training camp without me seeing a drop from him. And in fairness, I haven't watched the tight ends all that often, which, I mean, if you read my notebooks, you can kind of tell I haven't watched them that often because I haven't written a lot about them. But yeah, I mean, he's been winning a lot of matchups. He's been winning matchups against linebackers, driving them off the ball. Audie Cole, for example, has done a fantastic job of driving through both fullbacks, Zach Line and Blake Renaud, driving through Kyle Rudolph and driving through Michael Pruitt in order to get to the runner on a lot of plays. But he has done a pretty poor job against David Morgan. Just to put that in perspective, like David Morgan's doing a better job blocking than the fullbacks are, and he's been able to do this to Edmund Robinson. He's been able to do this to Chad Greenway. He's been able to do this to Eric Kendricks. He's even been able to do this to Anthony Barr. So he's looked pretty phenomenal. I think Josh Zimmer used the word monster or something like that. Josh Zimmer, not related to Mike Zimmer, is a reporter for NGDC Sports, I think. Anyway, you can find him at JZimmer _NFL on Twitter. He's a former defensive lineman from Minot State, so he's got some pretty good opinions for blocking and O-line, D-line stuff. So I trust him, and he's also impressed with David Morgan. And then two more names. I'm trying not to say Trey Roberson because I've been talking about him way too much for a dude who's definitely going to get cut. But I'm impressed with him, and sometimes impressive means impressive for your expectations going in. And I thought the dude was going to be terrible. I thought he was going to be the worst defensive back on the roster. He's a converted quarterback from Illinois State. He has never played defensive back in his life. It's a very difficult position to pick up. I mean, Trey Waynes had to sit for a year. Some very good defensive backs have had to sit for a year, not just with the Vikings, but with other teams. And he seems to have picked up on it really well. He's athletic, he's fluid, he's natural. He's losing a lot of matchups, and that's to be expected, right? I mean, I'm not going to, say that, he's better than Trey Waynes or Terrence Newman or anything like that. I mean, he's definitely not that. But the fact that he is competing at the level that he is, I think is very impressive. And then if I'm going to pick another bottom of the roster name, a guy who's likely to get cut, but I think is performing really, really well, Nick Easton, the other center. There's Joe Berger, there's John Sullivan, and then there's Nick Easton because Zach Kieran's playing guard. He's not a center. So Nick Easton, the other center, I think is playing extremely well. He's been doing really well against the third and fourth team defensive tackles. He's had some play against the second team defensive line after, Brandon Fusco went out and Joe Berger had to play first team guard. And so Nick Easton moved up to the second team for a second. And he played really well. So, yeah, I think that's 7 names. Did you keep track?
No, we'll call it 7.
Cool. Least impressive. I don't have to go into detail for the least impressive because you would know why they were the least impressive. TJ Clemmings, not blocking well, therefore not impressive. Jabari Price, not defending well, therefore not impressive. Also has been involved in 2 or 3 fights, has maybe lost all of them. That's not surprising given that he's like 5'10". But also, you have to admire the feistiness. I think the fact that he keeps getting into fights even though he's lost them, and the fact that he was even close to Laquan Treadwell in a fight, I just want to give him props for that. But he's also played very, very poorly. So I want to put that out there. Jarius Wright, I was talking to a couple of people today, and not like people with the team. I don't want to say like, oh, I've got sources, but I was talking to a couple of people who've been watching throughout camp, and I would say that Jarius Wright has actually performed more poorly than people we know are going to get cut, like Markin Michel, like Isaac Frichte. Like Jarius Wright has performed extremely poorly in camp, so. Going to put that out there as one of the least impressive after signing an extension, right? Matt Kalil, one of the least impressive. I did say he looks better this year. That doesn't mean he's playing very well at all.
Better than bad still isn't good.
Right. Well, better than awful, right? Is maybe he's not very impressive. I will say he's grown as a run blocker. It seems like he's more physical. He has the ability to drive down. I don't know. It's weird. In last year's run blocking assignments, were usually not that difficult. He was usually down blocking and usually had the benefit of a double team as a run blocker. But this year, they're having him do all kinds of things, and he looks pretty all right. They're having him kick out block. They're having him down block. They're having him get to the second level. They're having him pull on traps. They're having him drive block. He's doing pretty well. But he's still a pass blocker first and foremost, and he's been bad at that. So put that out there. Sean Hill, terrible. Looked all right in the night practice, actually. Looked pretty good in the night practice. Continued to be terrible afterwards. So
he was in one good photograph.
Was he?
Well, there's I think it's Sean Hill. It might be Heineke, but there's one of a passing drill where Bridgewater and one of the backups are both like passing simultaneously to different targets, and it
was from this year. It's not Heineke because Heineke's been sidelined from camp entirely.
Oh, okay. Then yeah, it must be Sean Hill. But there's a clever photo that will probably be the cover photo for this episode if I remember to make it that, and it still seems relevant.
We have cover photos?
Yeah, another new feature of the 2016 season, and the cover photos propagate to the Facebook post too, which is another neat feature that our listeners bought us.
That's fantastic. Thank you, listeners.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Anyway, that's 5.
5. Oh, crap. I thought it was 6. All right. Mobo.
Yeah. I mean, he said, like, what, a couple of, like, really amazing, like, standout plays that made everybody stand and cheer amongst a bunch of just, like, disappointing, like, fairly standard plays.
I was going to say he had one standout play, but that's wrong. He definitely had at least 2 because I remember one from today. So 2 highlight plays. In fact, the highlight play I predicted was the one that happened on the last day of camp. So hooray! It finally, came to fruition. He got open deep and caught it. That's what I was hoping for. I thought he was going to beat like a Melvin White or a Trey Roberson. I thought he was going to beat Trey Roberson deep because Trey Roberson ran a 4.56 and he's not a defensive back. And Mobo, who has played wide receiver at a high level as often as Trey Roberson played defensive back, might be able to beat him on sheer physical ability. So I predicted sometime somewhere before camp that he would beat Trey Roberson deep, and that never happened. But yeah, he's had 2 highlight plays, but mostly he's been pretty awful.
And lastly?
I kind of want to put Terrence Newman here, just because his expectation is to be an average level cornerback because he played at about that level, maybe a little bit higher last year, and he's been playing below average this year. There's not that many poor performers in camp. I already said TJ Clemmings and Matt Kalil. I don't know if I'd put the rest of the offensive line there. I wouldn't put, Sellier, Berger, Boone, obviously. I wouldn't put Fusco there, who's been a positive surprise. I wouldn't even put Andre Smith there, even though I don't think his level of play has been that high. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know who the 7th person would be. Oh, God, it's not Terrence Newman. It's Troy Studemeyer.
Wow, really?
So he is also a position convert. He played defensive back in college, and I think he played both defensive back and receiver in the CFL, but he's primarily a kick returner. And he's been dropping, so he's a receiver in camp now, and he's been dropping nearly every pass thrown his way. I think he has worse hands than Mobo. He's getting open much more often than Mobo, so it's a little bit different. But he's even dropped a couple of punts and kicks in the return game. So the one thing that would allow him to make the roster, I don't think that he's performing well at. So I definitely put him there. I'd say Stoudemire is a worse player in camp so far than Mobo is, which
yikes.
Everyone has been ragging on Mobo, and I think the difference is that in OTAs he did not look like he belonged in the NFL, and according to the beat writers, and at camp he does look like he belongs, and it helps that there's at least one receiver that's playing worse than him.
Well, I'm glad you took Terrence Newman off that list because he is one of the few NFL players. I think it's pretty much just like him and Adam Vinatieri and maybe like a couple of other kickers or something who are still playing in the NFL despite being older than me. So,
are they the only, like Vinatieri and Newman, are they the only players that played in the 90s that are still around?
Well, Newman is 37, 36.
Right.
I think, and Vinatieri is 42, perhaps 43, which is crazy to think about.
No, Terrence Newman was drafted in 2003. Man, the 90s, never mind.
Wow. What about Drew Brees?
Drew Brees is definitely, he was the 2004 draft, wasn't he?
2004? Okay, yeah. Then yeah, I think Vinatieri might be it.
Oh, man. After Peyton Manning and Charles Woodson retired, I guess that was it. No, Drew Brees was the 2001 draft. Why am I a liar?
It happens. I was impressed that you had a number so quickly, and I was willing to defer to it. But
That's usually how these things work.
I knew he was close. Like, whatever. At any rate, good on Newman for still being like an acceptable cornerback at whatever he is. What did I say? 37.
Sure. 37 or 38. Yeah, I didn't want to put him on the list. There weren't that many disappointing players. But I think that he looks worse than he did last year. So to that extent, he has not been impressive, but it's not like I'm upset or anything. It's not like I'm like, ugh, you shouldn't be here or anything like that.
Well, and besides, he old.
Exactly, he old.
So, yeah, I think we've established that Teddy Bridgewater has more of a deep ball than he got credit for last year. And I think we've established that the defensive, especially the line, is super lights out.
Right.
Beyond those two overarching takeaways, and we've established that Mobo is not going to be on the roster this year.
Right. I got into an argument. I think it was today. It's hard to tell because I had to take a couple of naps. So my understanding of days is screwed up. But I got into an argument, I think it was today on Twitter, about whether or not Mobo would make the practice squad. And a bunch of people were like, well, he has to make the practice squad. They drafted him. And he has so much upside. And it's just like, I've seen a lot of dudes get drafted not make a practice squad. And I've seen a lot of dudes with upside not make a practice squad. This is such a weird argument.
That's true. He doesn't have to do anything. It would be cool if he did, but somebody else might. I mean, I think we agreed earlier that he was kind of not like totally a PR play, but that was definitely part of it. Like, it was definitely a pawn in the NFL's European outreach program. Anyway, at any rate, what are some maybe less obvious takeaways that haven't been written about or hashed out on Twitter over the last week of training camp?
I was hesitant to so I haven't written about this yet, so I was hesitant to write it because I haven't been as diligent about logging snaps and plays and stuff like that. Plus, I mean, the Vikings are pretty vanilla. Every team is pretty vanilla at the beginning of training camp because they don't do install until a little bit later, so it might not mean much. But the Vikings might be more willing to run more plays from shotgun this year, and maybe, they'll get rid of that if Adrian Peterson continues to suck in shotgun. But I mean, that could be cool because the Vikings are not eliminating 7-step drops or even reducing them, it seems like, which it was a big criticism of Norv Turner from last year, from me, from a bunch of other people. And 7-step drops are something that are going to continue to do. It puts a lot of pressure on the offensive line, but it's the timing that Norv likes. And that's what they're going to continue to do. But they may be able to provide additional protection to Teddy through shotgun. There's been a lot of 5-step and 3-step timing from shotgun, so it puts a little bit less pressure on the offensive line. Obviously, it moves the quarterback further away from the pass rush, and it allows Teddy to survey, like more of the field. So there's that. Other key takeaways, I think that the defense, there's a push and pull between simplicity and complexity for the defense, where simplicity allows you to teach the defense, a lot better to your players, but it's also easier to diagnose, whereas complexity, is the opposite. And, there's value in complexity in the NFL. Like a lot of people always talk about whenever a new coach is hired, they're going to bring a new, simple approach, and that's going to make it easier for players. And that's not always desirable, even though it's talked up as desirable. And the defense can be really, really complex at times. And I think that there's an increase in the complexity of the defense just because there's a lot more continuity for the defense. So, I think that's probably a good takeaway that, the defense is going to focus on complexity as a way to increase the number of turnovers that they'll generate. And so, the Vikings defense was very good last year, but one area where they were not as good, that's not really measured in a lot of the traditional ways that we measure defense, things like points and yards, are takeaways. And takeaways are obviously better than forcing punts because you get the ball in better field position. And if you believe in momentum, that too. So I think that that's probably a takeaway we'll get at camp. Takeaway. That was not intentional. I'm sorry. Xavier Rhodes also has caught the ball several times, something he is not extraordinary at. So
you referred to him as a turnover averse in training camp notes.
Yeah, maybe that's the best way to put it. Yeah. So I think turnovers, and then I don't know. We already talked about Teddy's deep ball. That's going to be a thing. People have always talked about Jerick McKinnon getting more involved in the offense. That's a thing. I don't know. Team seems better. That's good.
Team seems better. That's good. This has been episode 142 of Norse Code. We'll be back with more next week. No, so Mike Zimmer seemed to, I don't know if he necessarily went out of his way to make it seem like he ended practice today because Brendan Fusco got in another fight. It seems like this is not like a new development. Rumor has it that this one was with Linval Joseph, which, I guess I could understand. They've been battling each other positionally, this whole time. And I know I would be super frustrated if I had to play against Linval Joseph. But do you think
would you take your frustration out in the form of a fight?
I mean, no. But then again,
is it because that's not how you're wired, or because it's Linval?
No, that's just not something I would do. I would never have gotten into the first fight, and it sounds like Fusco's had a few. But then again, I do not have, I think, the temperament to be an NFL lineman either. So take that for what it's worth. But do you think there's anything to this? Is this just like, as people from previous generations might put it, boys being boys, or just like standard chippiness, which is a word that I absolutely hate, by the way.
A couple of things. One, the practice actually did not end early because of the fight. The fight just happened to end before the end of practice. The practice ended early because of a storm, which I had to drive through. So that's what that was. Two, I wouldn't worry about it. Or actually, two, I should confirm. It was Fusco and Linval that started the fight, but they weren't the only two to fight. They just became a huge pileup.
A Donnybrook?
A brouhaha.
A foofara.
Skirmish.
When I think of a skirmish, I think of two jets.
Jets?
Or wait, no, that's a sortie. Never mind.
Yeah, that's a sortie. Come on, man.
Kind of fight.
I think Fusco swung, and then Linval just kind of rolled over on top of him. Which, I mean, if you were going to try and predict what those two fighting styles would be, I think that's how you would have predicted a bit.
It's an accurate snapshot of both men as players and also as fighters.
Yeah, so, that worked out pretty well. No, I mean, Zimmer didn't mind it. So I don't mind it. If Zimmer minds it, I mean, the fact that the press conference happened faster than I've ever seen a press conference in Vikings training camp, or evidently, according to some of the beat, ever. But after practice, and he didn't complain about the fight at all. Zimmer gets heated about stuff. He complains if he thinks the players are not complains is the wrong word. He goes off if the players are not up to standard or not, playing with discipline. So like he went off on the players and he let the media know when the players weren't playing disciplined. But I mean, the fact that they got into a fight, he doesn't mind that. That's just a thing that happens.
This did not register on his discipline radar or anything like that?
Right. And if it happened too many times in camp or if it happened too often between a specific set of players or something like that, yeah, it would bother him because it like distracts you from the focus of camp. But every so often, players need to let off steam, and so that's what happens. So yeah, one, practice ended early because of a storm. Two, it was in fact Fusco and Lindvall. Three, it doesn't matter. Those are the three things about the fight.
Cool. So any fun stories from the training camp portion of training camp? Anything that maybe happened in the locker room or the media room or even outside the facility that was particularly of note to you or might make our listeners laugh?
I wish I could think of anything. I mean, people don't recognize John Sullivan or Adam Thielen outside of camp. If they're not wearing the number, people have no idea who they are. So that's kind of funny. Let's see. The media, or not the media, the bloggers. It's a huge distinction, evidently. Keep playing Pop-Tart Roulette. I don't know if you've ever played this.
What the hell is that?
The PR staff keeps on buying different flavors of Pop-Tarts and then throwing the box away before we can figure out what flavor it is. So
what is the universally regarded worst flavor? Like what flavor does somebody pick and then know that they lost?
Well, we decided that it would be the frosted strawberry flavor.
What?
But
no.
Okay, no, two things. One, it was the most common flavor, so obviously that had to be the losing flavor. That's how roulette works. Two, it just wasn't as good as the other flavors. Like, it's a good flavor. It's fine. I like it. Well, but it's not as good as the other ones they had.
There is one objectively bad flavor of Pop-Tart, and that's brown sugar.
I was going to say ice cream sundae, but sure.
What? There's an ice cream sundae Pop-Tart?
It's terrible.
It sounds terrible. Why would you feed that to your children for breakfast? Here's your ice cream sundae, go to school.
I don't know, to encourage them to eat. It's not like regular Pop-Tarts are actually healthy. So
true, but whatever. I mean, I know that's not like it's only one component in a healthy breakfast that is composed of like healthy food and vitamins and then a Pop-Tart. But like
healthy food, vitamins, and a Pop-Tart. Now part of a complete breakfast.
Exactly. It is one component of a healthy breakfast. But like still you can at least make the argument that like fruit flavors, are somehow connected to the universe of like actual food that children should be eating throughout their day. And I think brown sugar like really gets to the horrible truth of Pop-Tarts, which is that no Pop-Tart is healthy and you're just feeding your child like sugar for breakfast. But like ice cream sundae somehow manages to take that and like double down on it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it does. There are novelty flavors this year that the PR staff was considering buying, maybe not for us, but for us to consume.
But against you.
Like there's an A&W root beer float flavor this year. There's an orange crush flavor this year.
Ooh. So yeah, I'm at least curious.
It's like the Jones soda novelty sodas. It's like not real, so I wouldn't count them.
Well, come back when they have a roast turkey Pop-Tart, and then we'll talk novelty flavors.
Great. Yay. So there's s'mores. That was a winner. If you got it. I love the s'mores Pop-Tarts, by the way. I think they're my favorite.
S'mores are like almost impossible to eat when they're cold. Like
that's kind of true.
Those are like a must-eat Pop-Tart.
Let's see. They had the chocolate fudge Pop-Tarts. Those showed up every so often. So we did that. That's not a very fun story. I'm sorry, guys.
I don't know. Pop-Tarts are something we can all enjoy sometimes as part of a healthy breakfast.
I wish I could remember any fun stories that I felt comfortable telling. There's not even that many I feel uncomfortable telling, honestly. This year, anyway.
Well, you bloggers are a fun bunch.
Oh, well, how about this? I got recognized a bunch when we went to Ribfest, and there was even a super fan that yelled my name from, like, I don't know how many tens of yards away, but at least 20 yards away. Aretha!
How was that for you?
That was pretty cool. She ended up coming over. She was like, I recognized you as in my Captain America shirt. Recognized you from your Captain America shirt, so good call wearing it.
It was not the iconic bald cap and thick beard that sold her. It was the Captain America shirt, or maybe it was the combination of all three. Maybe she just didn't say.
Well, I'm sure it was the combination of all three. I mean, there's not that many brown people in Mankato, so I imagine like if I wasn't wearing the shirt and she saw me, like she would recognize me. But like it draws attention. It's bright blue, so like that might like it draws the eye. I think is what happened. So yeah, so she came over and took selfies with us, took selfies with me. It took her a while to recognize Eric and Luke, especially because she confused the two and called Eric Luke and Luke Eric, which was pretty great. That gives me fodder for years.
You know, I do that on the show all the time with people much more famous than Luke and Eric. So don't take it too much to heart, you guys.
They did. They're crying now.
Oh, well, I know what Eric looks like, but I wouldn't, like, I could walk past Luke down the street and I would have no idea. Unless he said something. I could never forget that luxurious voice.
Potential. I also signed some gear this year, so that's cool.
Wow, look at you. The trappings of minor celebrity. Was it Vikings gear or was it like Captain America shields?
No, it was a Vikings hat.
Wow.
Yeah, but to be clear, this person knew who I was and did not mistake me for a player. Like it wasn't like, yeah, no, I'm the punt returner. I'll sign your shit. No.
Well, that's pretty great. That's I would say that's story worthy. I'm proud of you.
That was pretty
frankly.
cool. Oh, also, a guy approached me while I was in the bathroom at the urinal doing what one does there, and told me he knew who I was and was a fan of my work. Pro tip: don't do that. That's weird.
Did he have a wide
wash
stance?
My hands. I didn't hear what you said.
Did he have a wide stance?
No, Dusty.
No. Okay. Well, then you can infer that
Larry
his intentions were pure.
Larry Sanders.
No, it was Larry Craig.
Larry Craig. Who am I? Who's Sanders? Bernie Sanders. Not the same person at all. Okay.
Yeah. Who is Bernie Sanders anyway? You can tweet the show at NorthCodeDN. No.
Yeah. No, it was not Larry Craig.
But yeah, the bathroom, like, and especially like if you're like at the urinal doing the thing, then come on, man, like space bubble, like that's right. Like stop your conversation and finish it like at the sink. Like, come on, that's standard etiquette. Gee.
Yeah, just have to let me like start washing. I don't even have to finish washing my hands before you like talk. Just let me start washing my hands so we can talk.
Exactly, you're busy there. Come on, come on. That's good. That's the trappings of minor celebrity. You should enjoy this now before it escalates into people just like appearing at your home and waiting for you to leave it before they can approach you and tell you how much they like your work. Which I don't know if that happens. It might. You're pretty famous, it seems like.
That hasn't quite happened.
Well, good. See that it doesn't.
I may have accelerated the process by doxing myself a couple weeks ago.
What?
Well, it's a long story.
All right, we'll save it for next week then.
So, what are we talking about? What's the podcast?
We've told enough meandering stories already. I got to complain about Frontier Airlines for like 5 minutes. We'll have to save your doxing story for another day. Because there is at least one item of Vikings news, just like random Vikings news to cover. And that was Brett Favre being inducted into the Hall of Fame. His locker is engaging in a bit of revisionist history in the sense that it does not even acknowledge that he ever played for the Jets.
Right? Or was drafted by the Falcons.
Right? But it acknowledges the 2009 season.
I mean, his best season. I mean, I don't even know if that's up for debate. Like, I guess it's up for debate in the sense that, like, he didn't win a Super Bowl that year. But, I mean, statistically, his best regular season.
Well, and what's so amazing is that, like, you know, admittedly, he was propped up by, like, like small mountains of Vicodin for a chunk of the time that he was playing in Green Bay, but he was just what apparently like injury proof. Like he would just come in week after week after week after the man's father died and he was there 2 days later. Like nothing could stop Brett Favre except for the ravages of time and the cessation of his painkiller addiction, or the cessation of his consumption of painkillers, to be more precise. And then just when you think you've seen everything and Brett Favre is about to be written to the history books, he comes back and has the best season of his career in Minnesota.
It's incredible. And I'm glad that happened, because that's hilarious. And that's all I really wanted.
The whole thing is just so... It seems like a movie. It seems like a sequel to The Replacements. From start to finish. It's Gene Hackman like flying to Hawaii and like finding Keanu Reeves on his like plantation in Maui, like collecting coconuts or whatever he does, and being like, one more year is all we need. And he's like chomping on his cigar, and then he throws his hat on the ground and he's like, "You'll play better than you ever have before." And Keanu Reeves is like, "Well, no, I don't know." And then he comes out and he does. And then it's a feel-good story that we can all enjoy, except for the part where they don't win the Super Bowl. But that was never really the point in the first place. And that is just like, I don't know. You can't make this stuff up. Truth is stranger than fiction. And Brett Favre proved that. And that's why he gets a Vikings jersey in his Hall of Fame locker.
It's so great. That's so amazing. I love it.
The Vikings released the, I guess, preliminary version of their depth chart. Is there anything of note in there other than that it happened? I don't know. I mean, given what has happened in the last couple of preseasons, I don't feel like we can really say that much about it in advance of the actual season starting. So
yeah, we've seen people listed at the top of the depth chart get cut. Like, I think Chris Crocker's the best example. He was a guy that was the first team safety with Harrison Smith. Who is he, you may ask? He wasn't even in training camp the first day of training camp. He was a veteran that played for Mike Zimmer with the Bengals. He was on his last legs. Showed up at training camp, took the first team spot from, I guess, everybody, and started a preseason game and was outright cut. That was also the year the Vikings cut Kurt Coleman, Pro Bowler.
Whoops.
Yeah, well, he probably would have been bad in Minnesota, so, it's not that big a deal. It just feels like a big deal. It's like, you know more about baseball than I do, but, like, at the time, the Twins getting rid of David Ortiz made sense, right?
I mean, yeah, like, well, so I think
okay,
what we can all agree on is that Ortiz benefited massively from having somewhat better hitting coaching. Like, not even like significantly better, but just not terrible. And then he became like a classic power hitter, and he was still relatively young when the Twins traded him away. And you could still make the argument that the Twins, in very classic Twins style, traded him for less than he was worth at the time.
Okay, sure. How about this? Chris Carter would not have been the receiver he was if he had not been cut from the Eagles.
I mean, you'd be in a better position to confirm or deny than I. But So Carter came into the Dennis Green coached Vikings, right?
Yeah.
So maybe again, maybe it really was a similar situation. Maybe Carter became the receiver he was because he had coaching that was more appropriate to his style.
Well, it was more he needed a kick in the ass about his addiction issues.
He needed someone to light a fire under him.
Yeah, and he said this like a million times. Like, Buddy Ryan released him because of his alcohol and drug abuse, and then released a statement to the press that the reason he cut him was actually just because the only thing he did was catch touchdowns, which is where that phrase comes from. So, yeah. So maybe that's sort of the best example. It is different because I don't think Kurt Coleman needed a kick in the ass, like, to get over addiction issues. He needed, like, a different environment, maybe a scheme that suited him better and stuff like that. But yeah, so I think it's kind of similar that, like, he is not useful with one team. He's a Pro Bowler with another team. That just happens.
RG3's counting on it.
I'm cheering for it, man. I'm cheering for RG3 to turn Cleveland around.
I am too. That poor guy got railroaded so hard in Washington, and I think his reputation is undeserved.
I think so too. And the thing is, I can also think that he acted a little bit entitled and a little bit selfish, maybe even quite entitled and quite selfish. But I don't think that means that the reputation that he earned was, because the reputation he has is like way harsher than that, and the treatment he got from the Washington team, as well as Washington media and Washington fans, was a million times worse than the reputation he earned nationally out of that. So all of those things I think are true. That, like, yeah, I guess maybe he was selfish and entitled. Like, he said some, like, weird stuff, but, like, it was overinterpreted. Like, I remember one game, they asked him about a bunch of stuff, and he's like, it's on me, it's on me, it's on me. I should play better. It is, difficult if the offensive line is giving up, like, pressure on every play, but I need to adapt to that, and it's on me, it's on me, it's on me. And then everyone focused on so RG3 blamed the offensive line, and it's like, well, no, but if he did, would he be wrong? No. So who cares? Like, he didn't, and I understand that, like, leaders need to say, they say leadership is to say, if we win, it's we. If we lose, it's me. I think that's kind of outdated, but...
Well, but like Washington, like from ownership, like from top to bottom is, stuck with such a vacuum of leadership that RG3 saying that is like a fart in a hurricane. Like,
that's true too. I think that's like really significant. I think that's kind of lost. Maybe with Scott McLuhan at the GM spot with Washington, things will change. But yeah, I think that from the perspective of the organization that RG3 is dealing with, for sure. And like, leadership is a skill that can be honed in the right environment, and I would argue that maybe that was not the right environment. Also,
sitting on the sideline with a busted knee is not a good environment to develop leadership.
Yeah,
although I guess you...
nor with Art Briles.
Yeah. Also a fair and moderately compelling point. Is there any other, like... Did anything else happen this week that we need to cover? We have kind of an extensive mailbag this week. We got a very long essay from...
yeah, that'll actually be pretty fun.
From Tom Addison. There's only a couple of, like, genuine questions in here. A lot of it is like analysis disguised as questions, which I don't want to dig too much into, but there are a couple of really good questions in here that I do want to pick your brain about, and then maybe we can use other parts of Addison's email to ask follow-up questions. At any rate, lots of stuff to go through. Do we miss anything before we go to that?
Let's see. Tim Tebow's a baseball player now.
Okay, this is
Please go off.
Dumbest thing I've ever heard. And Gary Sheffield, of all people, is like, we can turn Tim Tebow into a baseball player in 2 years.
What?
That is the
Why?
dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, you might be able to turn Tim Tebow into an acceptable fielder in a couple of years, but if I recall correctly, throwing accuracy was never really his strong suit. I mean, I realize
he was like a really good high school baseball player, Dusty.
Yeah. All right. Cool. But no, seriously.
Hey, maybe he's... I don't actually know, because I don't know anything about baseball, as I don't know, you've been able to pick up from the podcast. But maybe his throwing motion is just like... It's like just a baseball throwing motion. Maybe that's why it's so bad for football. There are differently shaped balls.
Well, it doesn't look like it from watching him play football. I have never seen his baseball throwing motion, but I can promise you, like, how old... He's got to be pushing 30 now. He's got to be like, what, 28? Something like that? Plus or minus?
Yeah, something like that. Sounds about right.
Plus or minus 1 or 2.
He might be younger than we think. He was drafted in 2011, and I don't think he was 25 when he was drafted. So
okay, so we'll say he's 23 when he was drafted, and he was drafted in 2011, so that would make him
28.
28, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Plus or minus 1. If he hasn't played baseball since high school, that's 10 years. There is no way that his mechanics are at any stage of the game, even base running. Like, there is no way his mechanics are anywhere close to that of a professional ball player. And if he never played ball in college, like, baseball has the longest, like, incubation time. Like, every baseball player is like a 10-kilometer Pokemon egg. And the reason that baseball has such an extensive farm system is because frequently you walk those 10 kilometers and you hatch a Weedle or an Eevee or something. And it's lame. And that's why minor league baseball players get paid so little, because you can spend your entire high school career and your college career, and then years after that in the minors, like honing your craft, and you still won't be as good as the guys that play in the majors. And there are a lot of guys that play in the majors compared to, other sports. Now, there is no way that Tim Tebow...
So this is actually the point I was making earlier to someone I was talking about this with this morning, is that he's 28. I just looked it up, by the way. He's 28. So good call, Dusty.
Yay.
He's 28. It takes, 4 years? Is that sound about right? For a really, really talented prospect to enter the major leagues?
Well, depending on the farm system, you can, like, you'll come out of college, you'll enter the farm system, and then sometimes, depending on the desperation of the team, Colorado Rockies, or the patience of the team, in this case the Twins, 2 to 4 years until you start seeing time in the majors.
Okay, so 2 to 4 years. 2 years, I assume, for particularly polished prospects.
Yeah, or semi-polished prospects for a team that is like badly plagued by injury or lack of talent.
Cool. So yeah, that makes sense. So you're expecting him to play at about a replacement level. If you're being optimistic, you're expecting him to play at about a replacement level when he's 32. What is that worth to anyone?
Well, no, and that's what blows me away about what Gary Sheffield said. Like, first of all, since when is Gary Sheffield like a position coach? And second of all, like, even if you are able to somehow get Tim Tebow pro ready in 2 years, which if you could do that, then you need to start like coaching in the minors, because you are some sort of like baseball whisperer. And baseball. And you should be coaching these young guys instead of wasting your time on has-beens that haven't touched a bat in 10 years, like Tim Tebow. And I don't know. I guess he can make a contribution somehow at 32.
DH.
Okay, but there's no way that he can be a competent hitter in 4 years if he hasn't touched a bat. Like, there's no way that he can compete against, young, qualified American League pitching at age 30 after 10 years out of the league with, 2 to 4 years of practice. This is the dumbest thing I've ever... I don't know who Tim Tebow's PR guy is, but he's amazing because he can come up with the most ludicrous schemes and still get Tim Tebow back in the news. He can still get a headline for good old Timmy Teebs. And what I don't get is why he doesn't just stick to like broadcasting. Like, Tim Tebow he's
incredible at it. He's so good at
genuinely good football broadcaster. Like, why doesn't he just like stick to what he's good at? Like, he just, the guy, for someone with such deep and abiding faith, it really seems like he's trying to project his own desires onto what he thinks God wants for him. Like, clearly he's a natural at broadcasting. Maybe that's God's plan for him. I hope he figures that out soon, because like, we're maybe 1 or 2 years away from Drew Brees joining the NFL Network. And I would much rather listen to Tim Tebow than Drew Brees.
Yeah, actually. I very strongly agree with this. That's in the news. Someone tweeted out that one of the greatest accomplishments in Michael Jordan's career is getting to bat 200 in the minors.
Well, exactly. Well, okay, so leaving aside the, I don't know if you can still call this a conspiracy theory, but the belief that Jordan only got his opportunity to play in the minors to like dodge charges that he was gambling on basketball games that he was involved in.
Right. Leaving that aside,
that is a much more reasonable baseline for one professional athlete transitioning into another sport. I mean, the only person who's ever really done it with any kind of success was Bo Jackson.
But he was playing baseball when he got drafted to play baseball. Like, he was a college baseball player. He was a really good college baseball player. Then he got drafted to play football. He said no, and then the Royals drafted him because he had played baseball that season too. In fact, that's the reason he had to enter the NFL draft, is because he got his NCAA eligibility taken away from him by the Bucks, which is why he refused to be a Buccaneer. Anyway, he was playing baseball the year that he got drafted to play baseball. So I think that's
playing baseball
a lot different.
Weeks before he was drafted to play football. And yeah, Tim Tebow, I don't care if Tim Tebow's been playing softball every summer, even while he was playing with the Broncos. There is no way that he can even touch the kind of performance that Bo Jackson had. And no one probably can. There probably aren't any other athletes right now that could do something like that. And not Michael Jordan. You know, everybody thought that Michael Jordan was the greatest athlete of all time, and the Bo Jackson comparisons were being pumped up by the media at the time, but they didn't pan out, because it turns out that hitting a baseball is possibly the most difficult thing to do in like major league sports.
Yeah, and so someone said unironically, and they were saying it in a way that's kind of a hot take, but more to demonstrate a point, that Jordan finding a way to get up to become a 200 hitter in the minor leagues is one of the most amazing athletic accomplishments in his or anyone's career. Like, is the point they were trying to make. And I think that that's a good point, right? That it's, guess what? Baseball is really hard. All the sports are hard. So, playing at a professional level, very hard. The idea that someone can let it go for 10 years and pick it back up, I don't know.
My skepticism meter has been damaged by this story. I'm full of broken meters over here.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. It's not your fault. It's been a long week in the news world. So, first-time writer to the show, Tom Addison, is, I guess, applying for an analyst position at Norse Code that does not yet exist. Very enthusiastic. Do not take this as like do not be dissuaded by this, Tom, because this is amazing work, and we would like to see more of it. However, we are going to cherry pick some of this, because answering 11 questions, especially such detailed ones, with the detail that those answers would deserve, is beyond the scope of one podcast. Tom Addison writes, in relationship to Teddy, do players ever get leadership training as an off-season development? We see the cottage industry of trainers and training facilities that have popped up during the off-season. You would think there'd be sports psychology or leadership industry as such too. Corporations in the military develop leadership skills. You just don't hear about it in the NFL. Of course, we could all just go the Jeff George route too and be an ass to everyone.
Is that part of the question?
Yes.
That's great. I like that.
But see, Tom, we can't all do that, because Josh McDaniels tried that, and it did not work out very well for him, or regrettably for Jay Cutler.
Well, what if he wasn't being enough of an asshole?
That was not the problem.
Turn it to 11.
He turned it to 11, and then he ripped the knob off, and then in less than a season, Brandon Marshall and Jay Cutler were gone.
Did Brandon Marshall make anything of himself after that?
I mean, he went to the Jets for a minute, and the Bears for a minute.
No, yeah, I'll say this. Yes and no. I think that the NFL is probably behind in this respect, and the RG3 discussion we had earlier aside, they do have sports psychologists and people whose job it is to develop leadership in quarterbacks employed to teach quarterbacks, but it's like part and parcel with the offseason training they tend to have with quarterbacks coaches. So, for example, George Whitfield is a quarterbacks coach, but he's part of a quarterbacks coaching team that includes people who train them in PR, train them in like leadership, train them in a bunch of other things. I'm not so sure that training is necessarily well backed or well founded, but that's sort of probably up to the individual organization. There are throwing coaches, which are distinct from quarterback coaches, and I think Tom House, there's a really good piece at MMQB about Tom House, the quarterbacks coach. He's really more of a throwing coach in that he does a lot of biomechanical stuff, and that's less about sort of the complete package for quarterbacks. And you tend to see these quarterbacks coaches in the offseason for college players or in the train up to the draft, but there are players that will continue their relationship with those coaches. So in a way, but there's not like a leadership seminar they go to, right? So yes and no.
Great answer.
Cool.
Let's see. We now see Beaver's transition over to right guard. Does that align with the footwork problems and poor college shape and his available skill set that we apparently know about him?
No, and I addressed this in my second article breaking down Willie Beavers, which is that you may be able to resolve a lot of the problems that he had at tackle by moving him to guard because he doesn't have to deal with the speed off the edge, which was one of his bigger problems. But I think that it magnifies another weakness of his because he's mostly made of weaknesses, in my opinion, which is his inability to deal with hand quickness. Yeah, because, I mean, that's just a much bigger problem when you're a guard than when you're a tackle. So, yes and no again. I think that guard is still not a good position for him. And despite him doing well sort of early on in camp, he is most often and most consistently done very, very poorly.
And finally, do you think Zimmer's non-committal answer on Thielen is a smokescreen? Thielen had drops on Saturday, but left Smith in the dust on one-on-ones and did it with a good move and not just athleticism. He also beat Rhodes deep along the sideline. Whose place is he holding if he is just a body?
I don't think he's just a body. I mean, there's a reason they're having him consistently run with the ones in the first team. I think part of it is a trust thing. I think that the coaching staff is too conservative about this, and obviously, I think it's a very good coaching staff, and they tend to make very good decisions most of the time. So obviously, that's But I think that there are some areas of criticism to levy. One of them, of course, time management and game decision making, which we've talked about in the past. I think that the evaluation of Willie Beavers is another problem, and I think this is another problem that I think that they care maybe just a little bit too much. If they could just tweak this a little bit, they care a little bit too much about who they can sort of trust at a position, which leads to a problem that we saw with Leslie Frazier. Obviously, Leslie Frazier did it much more, and it was a much bigger problem when he did it. So I'm not saying it's the same level of problem or that they are the same coaching staff, but it tends to overvalue veterans and undervalue younger players. And so from that perspective, I think that they're just too willing to trust a player like Thielen, who has been with the team for a while, than to give Laquan Treadwell a run with the ones. But at the same time, I mean, Thielen beat out Wright for that spot. Thielen beat out Patterson to whatever that means for that spot. And they didn't bring a veteran in to take that spot either. So there's a reason he's running with the ones, and he's been doing pretty well throughout most of the offseason. He's had some really, really bad days, but he's also had some pretty good days. So I think that's kind of where they are. I mean, he knows the scheme, and I'm not going to say he's reliable because, like I just said, he's been pretty inconsistent. But I wouldn't say that he's a marginal player, that there's a smokescreen here.
Well, all right. Thank you, Tom, for the questions. Please continue submitting them as the season goes on. Your analysis is interesting, and we would like to explore more of it. Logan Reed also appears in the email inbox, which you can join by sending your email questions to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. I've always assumed Harris could cover deep with Hitman up at the line, but if we want to be versatile and send Smith deep, I didn't think Harris could handle the box. Is he now big enough to play in the box so we can maximize versatility? It seems like the system is kind of designed so that they can all sort of be interchangeable, and then one safety or the other can come down and try to either sack or block at the line. Does that seem
and that's kind of the nature of the question, right? Is that if Harris can cover deep but he can't play in the box, then he can't necessarily start. I get it. I would say yeah, he's definitely bulked up. When he weighed in at the combine at 186 pounds, that was actually sort of the trough. That's the lowest he ever weighed because his recovery from surgery didn't allow him to work out, so he lost a lot of weight. He played at closer to 200 pounds, and he looks like it now. I mean, he looks significantly bigger this year, and I think that's kind of the biggest concern everyone had about him playing in the box. And it looks like he can hit, so I'm not too worried about that aspect of it. Now, whether or not he has strong tackling angles, I'm probably going to have to take a look at what I wrote about him in the scouting portion of the training camp guide, because I looked at his college film to come up with some of that. But he was pretty assignment sound, and he seemed to be pretty intuitive and instinctive in his Vikings film.
Second question, a good question for us to answer. For all the fans out there, where can I get training camp info on the joint practices besides at Cincy Jungle?
Oh, yeah. So I just retweeted, not just, but I recently retweeted Matt Venzel or somebody who talked about who to follow at training camp. So the Cincinnati Enquirer is not the National Enquirer, and is in fact a newspaper of repute. And they cover the Bengals pretty well. So I would say they would be someone to follow. Other than them, let's see, where is it? Oh no, my timeline did not have all of my most recent tweets and retweets. So I would say also follow Paul Dehner Jr. So that's at Paul Paul Dehnerjr. So he's the Bengals beat writer and video host for the Cincinnati Enquirer. Follow Jim Owczarski. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He also covers the Bengals for the Enquirer. That's spelled Jim, Jimowczarski. I was already following before that. He provides pretty excellent work. Sarah P. America is doing some film work, so you could probably see some more practice footage from her, and that's Sarah with an H. So yeah, those are people I would follow. I also follow a couple of Bengals bloggers. The two I recommend the most are DB_Josh and Joe Goodberry, both, how it's pronounced, and they're pretty good.
And not that I want to sign a reef up for any extra work live on the show, but maybe we can include one or two of those in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll include them in the show notes, and I'll also include them in... I've got a training camp list that for Twitter that I've curated, so I'll just add them to the list.
Cool. Moving now to the Twitter mailbag. RacerK at RacerCraft on Twitter writes us, are there any schematic or philosophical changes on the offensive side of the ball that can be gleaned from camp?
From camp, not as much, just because I can't diagnose the running plays. I think there's a lot more man blocking this year, but that could be confirmation bias. Like I said, there's a little bit more shotgun, and there seems to be a bigger emphasis on aggressive playmaking. So we're seeing more shots downfield. We're seeing more shots in the deep intermediate, 20 to 25 yard range, as well as the 25 plus yard range. So those are I guess it's less schematic and more tactical, but those are the strategic changes I've seen.
Richard Snowden at @RSnowdenMagic writes, given coaching changes, was there a noticeable difference in camp versus last year? What stands out? Also, Skoll from the UK. Skoll, right back to you.
Fantastic.
Mate.
Yeah, scroll right back.
Whatever they say.
Not really. I mean, I guess Tony Sperano is kind of more of a hard ass, but not really.
Well, and he seems to be like a kind of an upgrade over last training camp, right? Like he seems to be like meshing well and kind of pushing the players to do, if not necessarily good things, at least more things, or like work harder doing the things they're doing. Does that seem accurate?
Yeah, and I mean, like it seems like players are responding in that manner, and it's always very difficult for me to like quantify that based off of like 10 days of watching, all 90 players and only catching some of them sometimes and some of them another time and some of them another time and only watching Sperano do this sometimes. But yeah, and it's not like there hasn't been a pretty significant sea change in the way that the offensive line is coached. Some of the tools that were there last year that Jeff Davidson liked to use are completely gone. There's a concrete blocking wall that they used to practice hand placement. That's gone. Now they use like medicine balls to practice punch. They use, basically boxing gloves to practice hand placement and stuff like that. So some things they changed the shoot really significantly. So some things have like very obviously changed. I just don't know like what impact some of this will have either psychologically or technically.
Skull88 at Skullpage writes, what do you think will be the split for plays/carries between Jet and All Day?
So one of the things Norv Turner said early in camp was that Adrian was going to get his. Like that was, and he said, I've seen what you all have been writing about, this person should get more touches and this person should get more touches. And, we're only going to have the ball, 60 plays and Adrian's going to get his. So that, I think, tells me right away that Adrian is going to continue to have a pretty significant share of touches. Some people have been predicting like 8 to 10 touches a game for McKinnon, and I would not go that far. Which means I don't think that he's going to get up to 150 touches this year, which is what some people are predicting. I would be very happy about that for sure. But yeah, I think that he'll probably get closer to 125 touches this year, which means that it's closer to 7 touches a game than it is 9 touches a game, right? That seems to like 18 to 8, 18 to 7 touches a game. That's probably the split that I'm expecting. But, parsing these specific numbers this early in the year, you're always going to be wrong. But that's my thought.
So basically like a 75-25 split, maybe 80-20, somewhere in there, barring unforeseen circumstances which never come into play in football?
Yeah.
All right. Luke Larson at Larson DeMartian on Twitter writes, what will be the measure of a successful season for Teddy?
That's interesting because like the marker internally is always going to be wins, and you should want your players to evaluate each other by wins. But for us, it's a lot different. Like for most people or for most quarterbacks, you could just be like, well, we'll see. We'll be able to tell basically if this person that we've been watching every snap of is better this year than last year. But for Teddy in particular, it seems to be much, much more difficult because there's a lot of disagreement about the type of player Teddy is. There's a lot of disagreement about, what he looks like and something about what he should be able to do versus what he does do. I don't know. The statistical benchmarks I would use would be things like improvement in touchdown rate. Like he could have the same yards per attempt, it's league average, but if he increases touchdown rate and decreases interception rate, I think that would be sort of hugely beneficial, right? Because despite the fact that he had a league average yards per attempt, his adjusted yards per attempt was a little bit lower. And that's just going to happen, like with the nature of the offense and the problems that he had in the red zone and stuff like that. Now I'd say if he improved his touchdown rate from 3% to 4%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it can be somewhat significant. So he threw 14 touchdowns on 450 passes, essentially. And if he increases his touchdown rate to about 4%, which is just, it's not that much more, but it's, it's 4 more touchdowns, right? Like that.
33% more touchdowns.
Yeah, right. So, that's not bad. So yeah, I wouldn't be upset with that. 4.5% would be really cool, and if he decreased his interception rate from, and which it wasn't a terrible interception rate or anything like that. It was only 2%, which is like I think it's top 10 in the league. The interception rate of 2%. In fact, it's tied for 10th. If he decreased it any amount, move from the Drew Brees category at 2% to the Aaron Rodgers category at 1.5%, I think we'd all be pretty happy about that.
I'm convinced that there is a large-ish subset of people who will not be happy unless Teddy wins the Super Bowl this year.
Yeah. I feel like that's unreasonable for fans, but reasonable for players. Players should want to only be satisfied by Super Bowls. Fans should kind of reel it back a bit.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Miles Swami at Miles Swami on Twitter. Why not Swami Miles?
I don't know, man.
That's probably his actual name, and I just, whatever. If true, I apologize. Anyway, he writes in, even with Newman at the top of the depth chart, does Waynes have a decent shot at starting? Hashtag Lil Waynes. Hashtag Weezy F Baby.
Yeah, I think so. We've seen, and aside from the Chris Crocker example, we've seen players start all preseason and then get bumped out the starting spot. I think that's how Sendejo took the starting safety spot. I think that someone else started ahead of him. We've seen, that happen along the defensive line. We've seen it happen, in the offense and stuff like that. We've seen it at the receiver position specifically. So, yeah, no, I think it's possible, especially because Newman is a little hurt, and if Newman, even if Newman isn't hurt, the improvement that Trey Waynes had over the last half of camp, if that translates into preseason, then yeah, that would be a good move, and that would be certainly possible.
Jake at Toolshed Jake on Twitter writes in, what player, if they don't make the 53-man roster, is most likely to get poached by another team?
That one's hard because I feel like there's probably a pretty good cutoff, but Spielman said that he expects to see some of the players they cut make other rosters. I wouldn't be surprised if Nick Easton, who has been traded across multiple teams at this point, cut and then arrive with another team. That's something. Jeremiah Searle, same thing. There's just a dearth of offensive linemen, and so if you cut one that anybody is valued at any point ever, then there's a good chance that they make a roster for someone else because there's just not that many good offensive linemen in the league. So those two, I would say, anybody who doesn't make it at defensive end. So if Justin Tratto gets cut, which I hope is not the case, I don't think there's a huge risk of him being cut, but there is a risk of it. He would definitely make a roster. Scott Crichton would probably make a roster. Zach Moore would probably make a roster. They all seem like reasonable chances to be cut. Kenrick Ellis probably makes a roster. He's had a pretty poor camp, but that's possible. One of the linebackers, maybe it's Brandon Watts. I doubt it's Audie Cole, but it's possible. They'll probably make a roster, and then who knows? Probably not Michael Griffin. I think if he gets cut, that's kind of the end of his career, but maybe. And then maybe Jabari Price. So yeah, those are the players that seem like reasonable risks of making a 53.
Speaking of Jabari Price, Adam West at AWestE1 writes, are there any likely candidates to be traded for a late or conditional pick? Thinking Exum or Price, maybe?
Or possibly Jarius Wright. Some teams around the NFL are impressed with him. I was kind of surprised at the deal that he signed to extend with the Vikings. I always felt like he could have gotten more money in free agency, and he doesn't really get a chance to prove himself with the Vikings because they're going to restrict him to a slot role. So he could be a reasonable risk to be traded, especially because he hasn't performed well in camp, and they've got kind of a glut at receiver and some roster pressure from somewhere else. So they may only want to go into camp with only 5 receivers. Jabari Price, for example, Nick Easton maybe, but I don't think they want to trade any of the offensive line depth that they have, even if they have to, risk, exposing some to waivers. Yeah, and then maybe a defensive lineman, Scott Creighton, for example, would be a good candidate to trade.
All right. Alex Goebel at Uleron writes in, what's the most overrated aspect of this Vikings team at this moment?
Most overrated aspect? Adrian? I don't know. That seems like pretty reasonable, right?
That's better than what I was going to go with. I was going to say offensive line, and that was going to make me sad.
Oh.
But I think they are more more properly rated than overrated.
Right. Yeah, and Adrian Peterson can still be a good running back, but people are convinced he is just the best running back in the league still. And aside from the fact that he's entering, his age 32 year, you take him off on the highest leverage down. He cannot contribute on third down. The most important down. You don't get a second chance. I mean, you do, but you really don't. After a third down failure. And so he can't be on then. He can't pass protect. He can't catch the ball. And he's not consistent as a runner. And that was okay between 2007 and 2012, and to some extent 2013. That was okay because his feasts were worth the famines. He's a boom-bust runner, and that's fine sometimes. But if he's inconsistent, I don't know, he was only averaging 4.5 yards a carry with the booms. Some of those booms were not that helpful, like the 80-yard run against Oakland. So he's not that successful a runner in terms of creating successes. And he doesn't, put the team in second and manageable as often as people seem to think. And I will still say, in those situations, he's generally a good running back. But he's overrated. He's not the best running back in the NFL. There's a bunch of other running backs I take above him. I take Todd Gurley. I take Le'Veon Bell, except for the suspension thing. But as a running back, I take him. I take Jamal Charles, right? I might
really?
take
even Jamal Charles, even injury-prone Jamal Charles.
Yeah, I mean, what they have a pretty similar amount of games played. I mean, Adrian, of course, some of that's because he beat a child, but
I shouldn't laugh. That's terrible.
Well, I could just kind of throw it out there, but yeah, they've played a similar amount of games. So injury proneness or not, it's not as if Adrian has been there for the team as much as
Well,
Todd Gurley. I don't know. I don't know who I'd be comparing him to. Marshawn Lynch.
Well. Yeah, I probably no. I don't know. I just feel like teams have figured out that they just always are going to defend Adrian Peterson hard, and that for the most part, teams have figured out how to do that in a way that restricts him to his boom bust style, where he either gets 1.5 yards or more than 15. And the short runs are much more if you look at last season, the short runs are much more common than the long ones. Much more. And, it's not like he's been frozen in carbonite since 2009. He old too.
Right. And, the idea that he won't age is a naive fantasy.
Or the idea that he isn't aging now. Yeah.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah.
Scott Brackett at Scott_Brackett writes, is it time to get rid of Rudolph now that we have a deep and versatile tight end group?
Kind of. This is not as hot a take as it might seem at first glance. Certainly there's no talented receiving tight end right now that we know we can rely on. Michael Pruitt is an exciting one. He's probably talented. I don't know that he's reliable, but it's not as if Kyle Rudolph is reliable. He costs a lot of money, so it'd be very difficult to trade him, but you might be able to trade him. The problem is that you've got two tight ends in a very similar mold in Rhett Ellison and David Morgan, and you want a receiving threat at tight end. You want a versatile threat somehow. And Kyle Rudolph is not a good blocker. He has not produced that much as a receiver. And so it's very difficult to like find a reason to keep him given the number of tight ends that are competing for time. But, at the same time, so Mike Zimmer expressed confidence that Rhett Ellison would be ready by week 1, which does create a lot of pressure. And maybe, that means it's time for Zach Line or Blake Renaud not to see the team instead of, maybe they get rid of a fullback instead of, do something about the David Morgan, Rhett Ellison problem. But I mean, that's 3 players that essentially are skill position players that basically only block. And yeah, Rhett Ellison has pretty good hands, and David Morgan has great hands. And they're both kind of underrated as receivers, but the reason they're underrated is because they're not receivers. At the point where you're arguing about whether or not they're underrated is not, you're missing the overall larger point, which is that they're not threats in the receiving game. They are really good outlet options that can gain you a surprising number of yards, kind of like Matt Asiata. I don't know that they can do the thing that is being asked of Rudolph. Rudolph has looked pretty good in camp. Maybe he finally gets above 500 receiving yards this year. Who knows? But yeah, I think that the idea of trading Rudolph is not that crazy.
Yeah, he is, and no one is even close to Rob Gronkowski in the sense that they are a consistent downfield threat,
Right.
Well, all right, that's going to do it for the extensive mailbag this week. Thank you to everyone who contributed questions. It's been a little soft in the last few weeks, but we forgive you. There hasn't been much to talk about, and I think we made up for it pretty strong. Is there anything else you'd care to add before we wrap it up? We are approaching the appropriate appointed time to end this podcast. Anything coming up that you'd like to plug?
No, I'm just going to write a couple more camp thoughts and stuff, so no worries.
Cool. Then you can catch Arif's work at all of the places where he customarily writes. At Arif Hassan NFL on the Twitter. I am at Dusty O'Connell on Twitter. Our producer James is at Big Mono on Twitter, and you can follow the show at NorseCodeDN. Make sure you check out our YouTube channel. It has a stupid link. So I'll just make Arif put it in the show notes. And make sure you check out our new website, NorseCodePodcast.com. Freshly shined up with a new style and cover art for every episode in a mobile-friendly format, fully annotated with episode notes. If you would like to contribute to the show, you may do so at paypal.me/NorseCode if you want to make a one-time donation to the show. But if you'd like to become a recurring member, sponsor the show month in and month out with maybe, say, a $3.50 donation, then we would really appreciate that. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/NorseCode. And of course, there's a link to that on our website as well, where you can also purchase Arif Hassan's Training Camp Guide 2016, or I guess we're still calling it that, even though training camp is pretty much over. Either way, it is a valuable Vikings compendium, and any proceeds go directly to Arif himself to support his tireless work traveling, driving through storms. You're like a newly licensed driver too. That must have been a very sweaty palmed drive home for you.
I mean, I've been driving for years. I just didn't officially have a license.
Oh, okay. Well, at any rate, driving home in a storm is not awesome, especially if it's super windy and you can't really see the edges of the road. That's never.
Yeah, the car waterplaned for a bit, so that wasn't great.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah.
Am I forgetting? Oh, yeah. DailyNorseman.com is a great blog to visit for all of your Vikings needs. It's the official SB Nation site and the home of the number one podcast, Codpast. Also, the home.
The Norse Cod swims approvingly.
Norse Cod does swim approvingly. Past, present, and future. Number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, which is this, Norse Code. And you have now finished listening to episode 142. Aren't you glad? Still waiting on that season 3 formula. Haven't quite figured it out yet. And so in the meantime, it is and will remain, keep Teddy alive. And we will see you next week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.